All right, so you're thinking about diving into Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, but you're not quite sure if it's worth your time.
Oh,
We've got some book reviews and Goodreads intel right here, and
yeah.
I got to say, the verdict is a resounding yes,
Oh, absolutely.
especially if you're looking for like a slightly darker, more mature Harry Potter experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. While the first two books definitely have that lighthearted charm that we all love, this one really does mark a turning point in the series. You can kind of think of it as that bridge between those really early adventures and then the much more complex and intense stories that we get later on.
That's a great point because I love a good series,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to lie, some of those later Harry Potter books
Yeah.
they're bricks.
Yeah.
So is this one going to demand a major time commitment from me?
No, not at all. It's actually one of the shorter books in the series, just 317 pages. So even if you're just like a casual reader, you can breeze through this one pretty quickly.
Music to my ears. All right. So, quick, captivating, and a little darker, huh? I'm intrigued. So, remind me, no spoilers though. What is Prisoner of Azkaban all about?
Okay, so picture this. Sirius Black, a convicted murderer, has escaped from the infamous Azkaban prison,
Okay.
and now the entire wizarding world is on high alert because he's believed to be a serious threat to Harry.
Oh,
And so this really does set the stage for a much more suspenseful and tense atmosphere than what we saw in like the first two books.
ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Things are definitely getting a little more serious. Now, the reviews that I sent over, they mentioned some new characters that really shake things up.
Yes. There are two in particular that really stand out. We have Remus Lupin.
Okay.
He's the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher.
Uh,
And then, of course, we have Sirius Black himself.
right.
And what's really fascinating is how both of their backstories are so deeply connected to Harry's parents. And this really does challenge everything that Harry thought he knew about his past.
I love when a book can make you question everything you thought you knew.
Oh, for sure.
So, besides just those new characters, what else makes Prisoner of Azkaban stand out?
I think the writing itself takes a pretty significant leap forward in this book. Rowling's descriptions become much more vivid and evocative. Like, for example, when she introduces the Dementors, those terrifying guards of Azkaban, she doesn't just tell you they're scary.
Right.
She describes, like, that bone-chilling cold that they bring and the way that they drain all happiness from the air. Like, even muggles who can't even see them, they can still feel that, like, just like utter despair.
Okay, that's giving me chills. So lots of chills.
Yeah.
But the review also mentioned some humor sprinkled in there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm all for a little bit of lightheartedness to balance out all that darkness. So
For sure. Rowling still has that great knack for witty dialogue and putting these like humorous situations in her stories. And I think one of the moments that always sticks with me is when Snape, trying to protect Harry from Sirius, disguises himself as Neville Longbottom's grandmother.
oh my God.
Yeah.
Just a classic scene. And it just injects some of that much needed comic relief into the story.
Okay. So we've got suspense, some deeper themes, and even some laughs. For someone who hasn't read this one yet, how would you compare it to other books to give them a sense of the tone?
Okay. I would say think of it as like a blend of classic fantasy
Oh,
and
yeah.
coming-of-age stories. So it has that really magical world building that you'd find in something like the Chronicles of Narnia, but with a touch more of like a darker and more introspective tone that you'd find in a book like A Wizard of Earthsea.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting comparisons. Yeah, I loved Narnia as a kid, and I've heard great things about A Wizard of Earthsea, so that piques my interest. But I do have one concern, and I bet some of our listeners do too. If this is book 3 in a series, am I going to feel lost if I haven't read the first two? That's a great question. And while Prisoner of Azkaban definitely builds on the foundation of the first two books, I think it also works surprisingly well as a standalone story. Rowling provides enough context and backstory to catch you up on the essentials without, like, bogging you down with too much exposition.
Okay. That's reassuring to hear because I always get a little intimidated jumping into the middle of a series.
Right.
But it sounds like even if I'm not like a diehard Harry Potter fan, I can still appreciate this one. What makes it so special then, even for someone who's just kind of starting to explore the series?
Well, one thing that sets this book apart is how it expands the wizarding world in these really fascinating ways. So we get to visit Hogsmeade, which is this charming wizarding village right near Hogwarts.
Okay.
And we also encounter some amazing new creatures.
Speaking of creatures, the reviews mention these terrifying Dementors. What are they exactly?
Yeah. So Dementors are these soul-sucking guards of Azkaban, and they basically represent like depression and despair, like literally sucking the happiness out of anyone who gets too close. And Rowling really uses them to explore some pretty heavy themes like fear and trauma, but also the power of hope.
Wow, that's pretty intense for a book that also has Snape dressing up as a grandmother.
Right.
So it sounds like there's a lot more depth to this one than I initially realized.
For sure.
But, I mean, is it still a good Harry Potter story? Does
Yeah.
it have that same magical feel?
Oh, absolutely. While the tone is darker, I think the magic is still very much alive. We see Harry growing as a wizard, learning new spells like the Patronus Charm, and discovering secrets about his family's past.
Wait, the Patronus Charm, that's the one where he conjures that silvery animal, right?
Exactly. And it's a really powerful moment that not only showcases his magical abilities,
Right.
but also reveals like this deep connection that he has to his parents.
Wow.
And speaking of family connections, this book introduces Sirius Black, who turns out to be.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. No spoilers, remember.
Right.
You're really making me want to read this now.
Sorry.
So, okay, you've sold me. Prisoner of Azkaban is officially on my reading list, but before we go into a deeper analysis of the book, I need a quick recap here.
Okay.
Why should someone like me, who's maybe a bit hesitant to commit to like a whole series, why should I prioritize this book?
Okay, so it's a relatively short and engaging read with a slightly darker and more mature tone than the first two books. It introduces those new characters, expands the wizarding world like we talked about, and it explores some surprisingly deep themes. And like you said, if you haven't read the first two, you can still jump in and enjoy this one.
Perfect. Now let's unpack what makes this book so captivating.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. So we've established that it's a captivating read, but let's really kind of unpack why it's so engaging.
Yes, and the reviewer mentioned that this book is packed with symbolism, and I'll be honest, sometimes symbolism kind of goes over my head.
Yeah.
So can you break down what we should be looking out for in Prisoner of Azkaban?
Of course, yeah. I think one of the most striking symbols are the Dementors themselves.
Okay.
So they're not just these scary creatures. They represent, like, depression and despair. Think about how they affect Harry. Like, they make him relive his worst memories, and he's left feeling completely drained.
Right, like they're physical embodiments of negativity.
Exactly, yeah.
But why use these fantastical creatures to represent something like depression?
Well, I think Rowling masterfully uses fantasy to tackle real-world issues. And through the Dementors, she kind of allows young readers to confront something as complex as depression, but in this safe, imaginative space. So it can even open up a dialogue about mental health, even if you're just talking about fictional creatures.
That's a really insightful way to look at it. It's like she's giving readers these tools to understand these really difficult emotions.
Exactly.
Are there other symbols in the book we should be paying attention to?
Absolutely. Keep an eye out for animal imagery. So, for example, Sirius Black's animagus form is a large black dog, often referred to as Padfoot.
Oh, right.
And this isn't just a random choice. It speaks to Sirius's loyalty and untamed spirit, which become even more significant as the story goes on.
Okay, so the animals aren't just there for magical whimsy. They actually represent deeper aspects of the characters. I'll be watching out for that.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have to admit, time travel always kind of makes my head spin a little bit.
Right.
So what's the deal with Hermione's time turner? Is it just a cool plot device, or is there more to it than that?
I think the time turner is actually fascinating because it symbolizes like the pressures of adolescence.
Okay.
So you know how Hermione is like constantly rushing around trying to fit everything in. It's very much like a teenager who's juggling school, friends, extracurriculars. And so the time turner in a way represents that desire to like control time, to squeeze in every opportunity.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. So
Yeah.
it's like a magical metaphor for the stress of growing up.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've convinced me there's a lot of symbolism at play here. What other techniques make Prisoner of Azkaban such a page-turner?
Well, I think Rowling is a master of foreshadowing.
Okay.
So she drops all these subtle hints throughout the book.
Yeah.
And it creates this like suspense and makes you just want to keep reading to see how everything unfolds.
Can you give me like a specific example? Because I'm always amazed at how authors can plant those clues without making them too obvious.
Right. So remember how Harry keeps seeing that large black dog like lurking near the Forbidden Forest?
Yeah.
At first, it just seems like a random detail, but it actually foreshadows Sirius Black's presence and his connection to Harry. It's subtle enough that you might not pick up on it your first read, but then Like on a second or third read, it becomes clear that Rowling was really carefully weaving that thread all along.
That's so clever.
Yeah.
Makes you want to go back and reread it just to catch all those little hints. Besides foreshadowing, are there any other literary devices that kind of add to the suspense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So she brilliantly uses dramatic irony.
Okay.
So we as readers, we know that Sirius Black is innocent, but Harry and his friends, they spend most of the book believing that he's dangerous. So this creates incredible tension because we're constantly waiting for the truth to be revealed.
Oh, I love that feeling. Knowing something that the characters don't.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like we're in on a secret. Makes you so invested in their journey.
Absolutely, yeah. And speaking of being invested, Rowling also uses really vivid imagery to pull you into the story. Like,
Yeah.
remember the description of the Dementors, like sucking all the warmth and happiness out of the air?
Right.
Or the sensory details of the feasts in the Great Hall with all the smells of roast beef and treacle tart, like, filling the air?
Yes. Like you could practically taste those feasts.
Mm-hmm.
I always appreciate it when an author can really paint a picture with words.
Yeah.
Now, it's clear that Rowling puts a lot of thought into her writing.
Uh-huh.
But does it ever feel too complex for someone who just wants a fun, easy read?
Not at all. I think one of Rowling's greatest strengths is her ability to balance these complex themes with accessible storytelling.
Right.
So she never sacrifices clarity just for the sake of literary flourishes. I think Prisoner of Azkaban has something for everyone. You know, you have intriguing plots for those who love a good mystery. You have these compelling characters for those who want the emotional depth. And then you have, of course, plenty of magic and adventure to keep you entertained.
Yeah, I'm starting to see why this book is often considered a turning point in the series. It sounds like Rowling really hits her stride in Prisoner of Azkaban, finding that, sweet spot between complexity and entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. This book offers like a richer, more nuanced reading experience while still maintaining that sense of wonder and excitement that made those first two books so popular.
Okay. Before we get to your final verdict,
Okay.
I'm curious, if someone's totally new to Harry Potter, is this the right place to start? Or do they absolutely need to read the first two books first?
You know, while Prisoner of Azkaban definitely can be enjoyed as a standalone, I would still highly recommend starting with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Okay.
It lays the groundwork for the world, introduces all those core characters, and it establishes that initial sense of wonder that makes the series so captivating.
That makes sense. It's like watching the third movie in a franchise without seeing the first two. You might enjoy it, but you'll miss out on crucial context.
Exactly, yeah. So reading the books in order lets you really fully appreciate the evolution of those characters, the deepening of the world, and just that growing complexity of the story. And then, Prisoner of Azkaban becomes this amazing turning point where everything you loved about those first two books is amplified and taken to like a whole new level.
All right, you convinced me. Starting with Sorcerer's Stone it is.
Okay.
Now let's talk about the big takeaway here. Why does Prisoner of Azkaban matter? What makes it such a significant book, not just within the Harry Potter series, but as like a standalone story?
Well, Prisoner of Azkaban is truly a masterclass in storytelling. It seamlessly blends elements of fantasy, mystery, and coming of age, all while exploring universal themes of friendship, betrayal, and the power of choice. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it, and it prompts you to think about the complexities of good and evil, the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, and the enduring power of hope, even in the face of darkness.
Wow, that's beautifully said. It sounds like this book has a lot to offer to readers of all ages, even beyond just being a fun, magical adventure.
Absolutely. And it's a book that continues to resonate with readers because it speaks to our deepest fears and desires. It reminds us that we all have the potential for darkness and light within us, and that even when we make mistakes, there's always a chance for redemption.
Okay. I'm officially adding this to my must-read list.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's already a fan of the Harry Potter series, is there anything you'd highlight as particularly special about Prisoner of Azkaban that might encourage them to do like a reread?
Yeah. I think this book is full of all these subtle details and foreshadowing moments that become even more meaningful on subsequent reads. Like knowing the truth about Sirius Black, for example, completely changes how you interpret his early interactions with Harry. So it's like you're seeing the story through this new lens, and you appreciate all the intricacies of the plot and just the richness of the characters in this whole new way.
Yeah, that's what I love about a good book. It keeps giving back, even after you finish reading it.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone listening who's already devoured Prisoner of Azkaban multiple times, a final thought for you to ponder. Given what we've discussed about symbolism and these hidden depths, what connections can you make between the events of this book and the broader themes of the series? How does Prisoner of Azkaban lay the groundwork for the epic battles and emotional challenges that await Harry in those later books? That's something to consider as you continue your journey through the magical world of Harry Potter. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Welcome back. So we've uncovered all this symbolism, we've explored Rowling's writing style, but what about the heart of the story? You know, those reviews I sent over, they mentioned some pretty heavy themes like betrayal.
Yeah, I think Prisoner of Azkaban really delves into the complexities of friendship. Like Harry, Ron, and Hermione, their bond is tested like never before.
Yeah, the review specifically mentioned Ron's pet rat, Scabbers. And it sounded like, more than just your typical pet rivalry.
Oh, for sure. The suspicion that surrounds Scabbers, it really creates this rift between Ron and his friends. And it forces them to confront these difficult questions about trust and loyalty, especially when, like, fear and uncertainty are clouding their judgment.
It makes sense, I guess, that a book with, a wrongfully accused prisoner would also explore those themes of suspicion and doubt.
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking of Sirius Black, his character really challenges that whole good versus evil idea, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. At first, Sirius is presented as this dangerous villain, but as the story unfolds, we discover that he's actually a victim of betrayal, wrongly imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. And it forces us to, question those easy categories of good and bad. And we start to recognize that things are rarely that black and white.
It's like Rowling is saying that everyone has a story, and sometimes those people that we perceive as villains are actually way more complex than we realize.
Exactly.
It definitely makes you think twice about, judging other people too quickly.
For sure. And this theme of moral ambiguity, it becomes even more prominent in the later books. So Prisoner of Azkaban is almost like a stepping stone into that, more nuanced gray area of morality, that we encounter in the real world.
It's definitely a more mature theme than what we saw in the first two books.
Yeah.
Besides those complicated relationships, are there any other, major themes that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think the power of choice really emerges as a central theme in this book. Like Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they're constantly making decisions that have very real consequences, impacting not only their own lives, but the lives of others.
Can you give me an example? I always find it fascinating how Rowling gives her characters so much agency, even in this magical kind of predetermined world.
Right. Think about Hermione's use of the time turner.
Okay.
She chooses to take on all these extra classes, pushing herself to the limit. And this decision allows her to excel academically, but it also puts her under a ton of stress and leads to some pretty dangerous situations.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be careful what you wish for.
Right.
She gets what she wants, more time, but it definitely comes at a cost.
For sure. And it just highlights that even seemingly small choices can have this ripple effect. And sometimes those choices come with some unforeseen consequences, both good and bad.
Yeah, that's a lesson that applies to everyone, not just wizards.
Right.
It really makes you think about the weight of your decisions.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got friendship, betrayal, the power of choice. Are those themes tied together in any way?
Oh, they absolutely are. The challenges to their friendship, it forces Harry, Ron, and Hermione to make these really difficult choices. Do they trust their instincts? Or do they give in to that fear and suspicion? And their choices ultimately determine the course of the story and their relationships with one another.
It's like a test of their character.
Yeah.
And they're figuring out who they are in the process.
Exactly. It's about finding your own moral compass, even when the world around you feels really uncertain and confusing.
It sounds like Prisoner of Azkaban goes way beyond just being a fun fantasy story.
Yeah.
It tackles those relatable human issues that everyone grapples with, even if they've never stepped foot in Hogwarts.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why this book continues to resonate with readers of all ages. It speaks to those universal experiences of growing up, navigating friendships, and making tough choices, all within this incredibly imaginative world.
Okay. I'm officially convinced that this book is more than just a magical escape. It's a story that makes you think, it challenges your assumptions, and it stays with you long after you finish the last page. Now, for those listeners who are thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but I've already read the book multiple times.
Yeah.
What's left to discover?
Well, Prisoner of Azkaban is layered with foreshadowing and symbolism that become even more meaningful on those subsequent reads.
Okay.
Like, knowing the truth about Sirius Black, for example, changes how you interpret his early interactions with Harry.
Oh, interesting.
It's like seeing the story through a whole new lens. And you're able to really appreciate all those clever details that Rowling wove into the narrative.
That's the beauty of a well-crafted story. It keeps unfolding, even after you think you know it inside and out. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban?
I would say that this book is more than just a thrilling adventure. It's a turning point in the series, both in terms of its tone and the depth of the themes that are explored. It's a story about facing your fears, questioning your assumptions, and ultimately choosing to believe in the power of good even when the world seems shrouded in darkness.
Beautifully said. And for our listeners, whether you're a seasoned Harry Potter fan or a curious newcomer, Prisoner of Azkaban offers a rich and rewarding reading experience. So grab a copy, settle in, and prepare to be swept away by the magic of Rowling storytelling. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.